I am 46 and being called a gold digger and worse by my late husband's family after keeping an inheritance that everyone expected would go to his children. My stepchildren won't speak to me, and I'm getting death threats from people online. But there's so much more to this story that changes everything. And I don't know if I'm being selfish or if I'm finally standing up for myself after years of abuse. Let me start with some background about my marriage to David. Died at 58. We were married for 8 years. And it was my second marriage after my first husband died in a car accident when I was 29. David had 2 children from his previous marriage, Jessica, now 26F, and Michael, now 24M, and their mother Linda had died of cancer when they were teenagers. When I married David, Jessica was 18 and Michael was 16. I tried so hard to build relationships with them, but they made it clear from day one that I would never replace their mother, and that I wasn't welcome in their family. They refused to call me by my name and just referred to me as Dad's wife. For the entire 8 years I was married to their father. Here's what most people don't know. I came into the marriage with significant assets of my own. My first husband had a large life insurance policy, and I had also inherited money from my grandparents. I owned my own house worth about $300,000 and had roughly $200,000 in savings and investments. David knew this when he married me, and he often made comments about how lucky he was to find someone who was financially stable. David had been struggling financially when we met. He owned a small construction business that was barely breaking even, and he had been borrowing money from his parents to pay for his kids' expenses and his mortgage. Linda's cancer treatment had wiped out most of their savings before she died, leaving David with significant medical debt. Against the advice of my financial advisor, I used $150,000 of my inheritance money to pay off David's debts and invest in growing his construction business. I also sold my house and used the proceeds to help David buy a larger home that could accommodate all of us. I did this because I loved David and wanted to build a life together, and because I hoped his kids would eventually see that I cared about their family's well-being. But Jessica and Michael never appreciated what I had done. In fact, they seemed to resent me more because they thought I was trying to buy my way into their family. When David's business became profitable again thanks partly to my investment, they acted like it was all his doing and that I had contributed nothing to the family's success. The problems got worse when David's parents started encouraging Jessica and Michael's hostility toward me. David's mother would make comments about how I could never replace Linda, and how the kids needed to protect their inheritance from gold diggers. She would say these things right in front of me at family gatherings, and David would just sit there silently instead of defending me. Here's where it gets really ugly. For the past 3 years, Jessica and Michael had been pressuring David to divorce me. They told him that I was too young for him, David was 12 years older than me, and that I was obviously just waiting for him to die so I could take his money. They said I was destroying their family legacy, and that their mother would be rolling in her grave knowing I was living in their house. What they didn't know was that I was actually paying for a lot of their expenses. When Jessica needed money for graduate school, I quietly gave David $25,000 to help her, because I didn't want her to struggle with student loans. When Michael's car broke down, I paid for the repairs. When David's parents needed help with their medical bills, I contributed thousands of dollars. I did all of this anonymously through David because I knew they would refuse help if they knew it came from me. David's original will left everything split 3 ways. 1/3 to me, 1/3 to Jessica, and 1/3 to Michael. This seemed fair to me since I had brought my own assets into the marriage, and had also contributed financially to building the family's wealth. The will was written this way for the first 6 years of our marriage. But everything changed last year when David was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The diagnosis was devastating, and David became obsessed with his legacy and making sure his children were provided for. During his illness, Jessica and Michael ramped up their campaign to turn him against me. They would visit David in the hospital and talk about all their memories with their real family before I came along. They would bring photo albums of their life with Linda and talk about how much happier David had been before he remarried. They constantly reminded David that I wasn't the mother of his children and that I had no real claim to the family's wealth. Here's the part that broke my heart. David started believing them. In his weakened state, he began questioning whether marrying me had been a mistake. He started making comments about how I was still young and would probably remarry quickly after he died, while his children would only have one father. He worried that I would take his money and spend it on a new husband and new family. 3 months before David died, he called his lawyer and changed his will. The new will left me $50,000 and the rest of his estate, approximately $800,000, to Jessica and Michael. He didn't tell me about this change until he was on his deathbed, and when he did, he seemed ashamed but said he had to do right by his children. I was devastated not just by the money but by what it represented. After 8 years of trying to build a family, after investing my own inheritance in his business and his debts, after being treated like an outsider by his kids and his parents, David had essentially validated their view that I didn't really belong in the family. But here's what David didn't know when he changed his will. Jessica and Michael had been planning to contest it anyway. I found out after David's funeral that they had already met with a lawyer months earlier to challenge any will that left me anything at all. They believed that since David and I had no children together, I had no moral right to any inheritance, regardless of what I had contributed to the marriage. The reading of the will was a nightmare. Jessica and Michael were thrilled to learn they were getting almost everything, and they made no effort to hide their satisfaction. Jessica actually said, "Finally, Dad came to his senses about what family really means." Michael added, "Mom's money is finally going back to Mom's real children where it belongs." But then the lawyer dropped a bombshell that no one expected. 2 weeks before David died, he had called the lawyer again and changed his will back to the original version. David was heavily medicated at this point and probably shouldn't have been making legal decisions, but the lawyer confirmed he was lucid during their conversation and understood what he was doing. The lawyer said David told him that he had realized he was being unfair to me, and that his children would be fine because they were young and could build their own wealth. David said he felt guilty about how his family had treated me, and wanted to make sure I was provided for since I had sacrificed so much for a family that never accepted her. Jessica and Michael were furious. They immediately accused me of manipulating David during his final days, and coercing him into changing the will back. They said I had probably threatened to leave him or deny him care unless he gave me the money. The accusations were completely false, but they were so angry they couldn't think rationally. Here's what really happened in those final weeks. David and I had several long conversations about our marriage and what I had given up to be with him. He finally acknowledged that his children had never treated me fairly, and that he had failed to protect me from their hostility. He said he realized that I had loved him genuinely, not for his money because I had actually brought more assets to the marriage than he had. David also told me something that changed my perspective completely. He said Jessica and Michael had been secretly hoping he would die soon so they could inherit everything and get me out of their lives. He had overheard Jessica telling Michael that, at least when Dad dies, we'll never have to pretend to tolerate her anymore. This broke David's heart and made him realize that his children's love for him might be more conditional than he had thought. So when David died, I inherited about $800,000 plus the house and his business. Jessica and Michael each got $50,000 and some personal items. They immediately hired a lawyer to contest the will, claiming David was not mentally competent when he made the final change, and that I had exerted undue influence over him. The legal battle lasted 8 months and cost me nearly $100,000 in attorney fees. But ultimately, the court upheld David's final will because there was clear evidence that he was competent and acting of his own free will. The lawyer who drafted the will testified that David was lucid and had explained his reasoning clearly. David had also written a letter explaining his decision, which the court accepted as evidence of his mental state. Now I legally own everything, but the family and community backlash has been intense. David's parents have disowned me completely, and have been telling everyone that I manipulated their dying son to steal their grandchildren's inheritance. Jessica and Michael have been posting on social media about how I'm a gold digger who destroyed their family and stole their mother's legacy. The story has gotten picked up by local news and social media, with people taking sides based on incomplete information. I've received hundreds of messages calling me terrible names, and saying I should be ashamed of taking money from David's real children. Some people have even threatened violence against me. But here's what the public doesn't know. I've actually been trying to find a fair solution since the will was settled. I offered to give Jessica and Michael each $200,000 from the inheritance, which would still leave me with $400,000 plus the house and business. I thought this was a reasonable compromise that would give them substantial inheritances while acknowledging my contributions to the marriage. Jessica and Michael rejected this offer completely. They said they wanted everything and that I deserved nothing because I wasn't David's real family. They said that $200,000 each was insulting because it was their money that I was generously offering to give back to them. They demanded that I give them the entire inheritance and move out of the house immediately. Their rejection of my compromise offer made me realize that this was never really about the money. It was about their fundamental belief that I didn't belong in their family and had no right to be treated as David's equal partner. Even a gesture that would have given them more than David's original will intended wasn't enough because it still acknowledged my legitimate claim to some of the estate. So I withdrew the offer and decided to keep the inheritance as David intended. But this decision has cost me everything else in my life. I've had to move away from the community where David and I lived because of the harassment. I've lost friendships with people who think I should have done the right thing and given the money to David's biological children. I've had to change jobs because my employer was getting complaints about employing me. The isolation has been devastating, but it's also given me time to think about what really happened in this situation. I realized that I spent 8 years trying to earn acceptance from people who were determined never to accept me. I gave up my own financial security, my own home, and my own independence to support a man whose children saw me as an enemy. And when that man finally recognized my sacrifices and tried to provide for my future, his children's reaction was to try to destroy me legally and socially. Here's the latest development that's making me question everything. I recently found out that Linda, David's first wife, had actually left a letter for David before she died. The letter, which David's parents had hidden from everyone, explicitly stated that she wanted David to remarry and be happy, and that she hoped his new wife would be treated as part of the family. Linda had apparently been worried about how Jessica and Michael would treat any woman David married after her death. She wrote that she hoped her children would remember that their father deserved love and companionship, and that rejecting his new wife would only cause him pain. She asked David's parents to help any future stepmother feel welcome in the family. David's parents never shared this letter with Jessica and Michael, and they certainly never shared it with me. They kept Linda's wishes secret because it didn't align with their desire to preserve her memory by rejecting any replacement. Learning about this letter made me realize that even Linda would have wanted me to be treated better than I was. I also discovered that Jessica and Michael had been lying about their financial situations to gain sympathy during the will contest. Jessica claimed she was struggling with student loans, but she actually has a well-paying job and had received financial help from David's parents throughout college. Michael said he needed the inheritance to buy a house, but he had already been pre-approved for a mortgage and was financially stable. Meanwhile, I'm 46 years old with no children and no family support system. The inheritance David left me is likely all the financial security I'll ever have, especially since the legal battle and social backlash have damaged my career prospects. If I gave away most of the inheritance, I would be risking my ability to support myself in old age with no guarantee that Jessica and Michael would ever treat me with basic respect. The final thing that's making this decision so painful: I genuinely loved David and I think he genuinely loved me too. But our marriage was poisoned by his children's hostility and his inability to stand up to them until the very end. I wonder sometimes if David would still be alive if the stress of mediating between me and his children hadn't weakened him during his cancer fight. So Reddit, AITA for keeping the inheritance my late husband left me instead of giving it to his biological children? Was David right to provide for me after 8 years of marriage, or should I honor what Jessica and Michael see as their mother's legacy? Is it selfish of me to prioritize my own financial security, or am I finally standing up for myself after years of being treated as a second-class family member? I miss David every day, and I wish we could have found a way to be a real family together. But I also can't ignore the fact that his children spent 8 years trying to drive me away, and now they want to benefit from the wealth I helped build while still refusing to acknowledge my place in David's life. Jessica just posted on social media that she's hiring a private investigator to expose the truth about how I manipulated her father. She's also started a petition to get my nursing license revoked, claiming I'm morally unfit to care for patients. I don't know how much more of this I can take. David's business partner just reached out to me. He wants to buy the business from me for $400,000, which would solve a lot of my problems. But he also told me that Jessica and Michael have been trying to sabotage the business by telling clients I'm untrustworthy. Sales are down 40% since David died. I found David's journal from his final months. He wrote extensively about his regret for not protecting me from his children's cruelty, and his fear that I would be destroyed by their hatred after he died. He wrote, "I pray she's strong enough to survive what they'll put her through, because she deserves so much better than the family I gave her." Reading this is breaking my heart all over again.